Okay, so we're going to deep dive into this article you sent me
All right.
about Saudi Arabia and Israel
Yeah.
and maybe normalizing relations
Yeah.
and how this all ties back to the Palestinian question.
Absolutely.
So this is a pretty fascinating article, actually. It really piqued my interest because
Yeah.
President Trump even was trying to push for this back when he was in office.
Right.
And but I think what's interesting about it is like the Saudis are basically saying,
Yeah.
like, sure, we'll normalize relations with Israel, but only if a Palestinian state is established.
Absolutely. It's a huge sticking point for them.
Yeah.
They are.
It's a non-negotiable.
It's a non-negotiable. Absolutely. And it's really fascinating to look back at how this whole thing kind of evolved. You know, going back to the Trump era, you see that Trump had this really radical idea. I mean, when you think about it, you know, he suggested that the U.S. should just take over Gaza, you know, relocate the Palestinian population, develop the area economically. I mean, you can imagine the kind of reaction that got on the international stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the Saudis were just like, absolutely not.
Right. They basically issued a diplomatic hard pass to the whole thing, and they made it very, very clear that their commitment to the Palestinian cause is rock solid. I mean, this is not just some bargaining chip for them.
Right. And so, like, when you look at, like, why they're so adamant about this, you really have to go back and look at the historical context.
Yes.
Like, you can't talk about
can't
relocating Palestinians without talking about the Nakba.
Exactly, which is the mass displacement of Palestinians.
During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, exactly.
Yes. And for Palestinians, this is a deeply traumatic event.
Absolutely. It's a wound that hasn't healed. And, you know, Saudi Arabia, they have this really unique position in the Muslim world. They can't just ignore that.
Right. So it's fascinating because on one hand, you have this like huge potential diplomatic win.
Huge.
Right. Like normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia would be a game changer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For both the U.S. and Israel.
Right. But then on the other hand, the Saudis are like drawing a line in the sand.
They are. They're basically saying this is our stance and we are not moving.
Yeah. What do you think about their strategy here?
It's a high-stakes game for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think they're just flexing diplomatic muscle. I think this is more than that. I think they're using their clout. You know, they are the custodians of Mecca and Medina, Islam's holiest sites, which gives them this incredible religious authority within the Muslim world.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you add their economic power. I mean, they are the world's top oil exporter.
Right.
So every time they say something, people listen.
It carries a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because you brought up the UAE and Bahrain.
Right,
and how they normalized ties with Israel.
Through the Abraham
Accords, right? And that was significant.
It was.
But it's not on the same level as this.
No, not even close.
Right. Saudi Arabia is
a whole other
level.
Ball game.
Yeah, this feels like a turning point for the whole region.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes it so interesting. You know, if Saudi Arabia were to actually recognize Israel, I mean, it could fundamentally reshape the entire political landscape of the Middle East.
Right.
And who knows? I mean, it could even pave the way for other Arab nations to do the same thing.
Yeah, but what about the Palestinians?
Right.
Right? Like, what does this mean for them?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, is Saudi Arabia doing this as like a genuine way to help the Palestinians achieve statehood? Or is this just geopolitics?
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to know for sure what's happening behind closed doors. But I think what we can say is that Saudi Arabia, by attaching this condition to normalization,
they have really put the Palestinian issue front and center on the world stage.
Yeah.
Whether this will lead to any actual concrete progress towards a two-state solution.
Right.
I don't know. We'll have to see.
It's complicated, right?
Oh, it's incredibly complicated.
There's so many players.
There are.
So much historical baggage.
Layers and layers of history.
Yeah, and it just feels like the region is always on edge.
It's a tinderbox.
It's like watching a high-stakes poker game.
Yeah.
Where the stakes are incredibly high.
Exactly. And nobody knows who's bluffing.
Yeah.
And that actually brings us to a very interesting question for all of you listening out there.
Okay.
Given their unique position and all of their influence, what role could Saudi Arabia realistically play in achieving lasting peace in the Middle East? Something to think about.
Yeah, great question.
All right.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
My pleasure.